Yeah. All right. Tuesday night, guys. Here we are. Oh, we got one person in. Thank you so much for being here. All right. So I put together a whole lot of notes on this thing today, and we're going to go over how to build a strongman program. I've got a whole ton of notes on this. I just started, putting this all together, and I'm actually going to go to the backside of my whiteboard today to break it all down. I know there's a lot going here, but I want to give you just kind of all the considerations that are going into different things if you wanted to just get stronger, work on all these attributes that are needed to be a good strength athlete. So why don't we just jump right in? And I promise you, I'm going to make this a lot more concise than what's all written here. So I'll go through everything, and then we'll kind of tie it all together as we move along. So the very first thing you obviously have to consider is, what are your goals, right? Now, you've probably heard the acronym SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T. This means we need to have specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based goals, right? So specific, obviously, if we want to raise our deadlift, we're going to work deadlifts, right? Measurable, if we want to raise our deadlift, we need to measure the poundage and the percentages that we're going up and increasing and want to hit, right? Achievable. So while we want to maybe raise our deadlift up, if we say, I want to put my deadlift up 200 pounds in 2 weeks, that's not achievable whatsoever. I don't care who you are. So we have to be realistic, and that's what that achievable means. Relevant, right? Like, is this relevant to your purpose? While you may want to work on your conditioning, right? Like, is it really super relevant to try to run a 5-minute mile if your goal ultimately is to be a great strongman that needs to work on their conditioning? No, that's not relevant whatsoever. You need to work in the specific relevant domains for you as a strength athlete. And lastly, time-based. How much time do we have? Now, one of the things that is the theme of this video is, I want you to consider thinking beyond a 4 or 8 or 12-week program. I want you to think about this long-term vision for strength and strongman, where you can piece out things over a 6-month period or a 12-month period, or heck, even a 2-year period to really maximize your results. So while we do want to understand where these short little puzzle pieces of a 4-week microcycle fits in, or a 12-week meso macro cycle, we want to really think about how all of those are the stepping stones to this very elite top level that we want to get to, okay? So time-based, just kind of think about that. Now, we have all these different things that we can train for. And this is why a lot of people get lost and get confused or plateau, is because, we could be training for a comp, a specific weight peak, hypertrophy, GPP, general physical preparedness. We always want some element of mobility. We need some power, and of course, we have to refine technique. But if we were to try to go 10 out of 10 effort on all of these things, they sort of interfere with one another, right? Like mobility, for example, if we're training for hypertrophy and we're getting as much muscle mass as possible and recruiting all those muscle fibers, you are more likely to be really, really stiff. So if you want to increase your mobility and flexibility at the same time, we're kind of working in opposite ends of the spectrum, which doesn't mean that both can't work for you. It just would be better to understand that you have to balance one or the other. So you could do short, hard bursts where you're thinking about this long term. We're going to be all right, 4 weeks of hypertrophy, 4 weeks of mobility, 4 weeks of GPP. There's different smarter ways to structure that out. Or, you could try to put every little piece of the puzzle in all the time so that you can always develop everything together at once, where you're not going to go hypertrophy here, and then it's going to shift down as you go into your mobility block, right? We can have everything collectively rise together at once. So I just do want you to consider what could happen if we really think about our long-term frame with all of this. So all of the traits that a strongman needs, it's not all of them, but just things to consider. You want to have speed. You want to have power, strength. And I just want to delineate, I want to distinguish between power and strength. Power is just moving something like really explosively. It's an element of speed and strength together, where strength is just like the top end number and amount that you can lift, right? So I just do want to be different, right? We don't want slow strength. We want fast strength, which is power. We also want conditioning, mobility, agility, and proprioception. Proprioception is your body's awareness to move in space. So this is just an important one. This will be worked in very easily and naturally. But just consider, if you're always using machines for hypertrophy, you can rely on the groove of the machine, which will really help fill your muscles up and get you big, but it's not going to improve your body's ability to know where and how it's moving through space. So how do we get all of those things? I think the best approach is to think long-term and fit all of these pieces into a workout program at once, only taking things out when we have a very specific goal. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in just a second. So building out an actual workout plan, what we want to do is stack and structure these things based on what your nervous system responds to. So we need to basically warm up, wake up the nervous system, and then tax it in the smart, appropriate way, right? So I kind of wrote this down as the 6 Ps. It just was alliterative, so I went with it. So we have a prep, position, prime, power, pump, and posture. Okay, so your workout should always have some element of this sort of a flow. So we want to warm up with our prep. We want to position, which is just mobilizing to be in the right positions to lift or do whatever it is that we're going to do for the day. Prime is exciting the nervous system. Okay, so there's a really good concept called post-activation potentiation. And this is one of the best things that you can use in your training. And this just states that you're waking up your nervous system to the highest level possible so that it is charged and turned on at a 10 to deliver at a 10 for everything else that comes after it, right? Once we excite it and wake it up to that high level, to that level 10, it's going to stay on for a long time. And we're going to be able to recruit more muscle fibers to lift more, lift harder, and lift longer only after it's excited. But again, we're walking this like balance act between wanting to activate it and wake it up, but without totally draining it, right? So thinking about all of these different traits that you need, we can warm up for a couple minutes to get our blood flow going, get some oxygenation through into our muscles. Those nutrients that we've been eating for food are getting delivered to where they need to go to fuel us for our workout. That doesn't take a lot from your nervous system. That's the autonomic nervous system, which is happening automatically. So prep, we're just kind of speeding up our blood flow. Position, it does not take much nervous system energy to mobilize, right? But then once we are loose, warmed up, blood flow is going, we're going to prime with things like plyometrics, only at a low volume, right? Because we want that nervous system fresh for the heavy work. That's when we come into power. We call it performance as well, power and performance. And then our pump work is just accessories, right? So then posture to finish it out, okay? So this is kind of a sample, and this is something that I've done repeatedly for some of my own workouts. I programmed this way for some clients, but it just works really well. So thinking about, again, long-term view, cycling different exercises and demands, we can build every single aspect that we need in Strongman through this type of workout. Okay, so first cardio, I will just do a couple minutes, 3 to 5 minutes on a ski erg or a bike, or, it's real hot outside, so sometimes I just got to get to my gym, which is outdoors, and just start walking around for about 5 minutes, and that'll get me going. Then we'll roll out, mobilize. Now, one thing we want to make sure that we're doing is mobilizing and not static stretching. Okay, you may know this, But if we're doing static stretching, like, let's just say reach for your toes, or, this stretch and hold, right? We're actually creating some muscle tears in our body that are going to take away from our muscles' ability to fire quick and explosively. So if we're doing any stretches, it should be active, athletic, and dynamic. So for shoulders, just some things like some arm windmills or some toy soldiers, right? Where we're getting a little active element of a dynamic stretch, but it's also getting our joints and our muscles the ability to produce and absorb power, which is what we want for strength work, okay? So foam rolling is good to wake up this. So is mobilizing with dynamic stretches. And then we're going to go into some sort of plyometrics. Now, plyometrics, this stuff, these first three, the cardio, rolling / mobilizing, and plyometrics, they all can combine once you have developed sufficient skill, right? So for my mobilizations, I've been doing a lot of handstand work. Okay, now progressively, right, I was doing facing towards the wall where I was at a pretty serious incline because my mobility was no good. So I would just do some handstand holds and then work up to some shoulder taps, and then I would get closer to the wall. But what those handstand positions are doing are forcing me to open up at the chest, get my arms, I'm real tight right now, bad example, but I have to get my arms behind my head. But this is where I was at for the longest time. But having to, extend in those positions for, just about 10 to 20 seconds at a time, over time gave me the ability to come back here. So when I'm saying mobilizing, we can already start working in, things like handstands or plyo push-ups that are going to knock out two of our purposes at once, which is mobilizing our joints and getting that power stimulus going. Now, I just really like simple things for plyometrics. When we're training strongman, we always want some element of power. And this is where you need to start fitting in with your specific and relevant goals, like what you need for the day. So do you have a moving event coming up, right? Well, sprints are a tool that's going to allow you to move fast with weight. So for plyometrics, this is just something, again, short term where we're firing as hard as possible. It may make sense for you to warm up, do your mobilizations, and do sprints first, because that's going to have such a great carryover into everything else. Not only is it going to prime and excite your nervous system, but it's going to build strength and power and just contribute to all of these things here. Low volume. I cannot stress this enough. We want low volume on the plyometric work. So other things you could do are, like I said, plyo push-ups, or I really like sandbag throws or box jumps, but I would say at most 10 to 12 singles of these if you're doing sprints, only like 3 or 4 really hard fought rounds with a long break in between, right? Because we want to get the stimulus of that without letting the fatigue build up into our explosive power work, okay? So anyways, going through this list, so what I would do again, I'd have cardio roll out with things like handstands for my press day, do some throws, maybe some plyo push-ups, and then I would go into the lock. So we want to make sure we're getting this fast twitch impulse from the plyometrics and immediately applying it into our main lifting work. So if you're doing like deadlifts, for example, I really like box jumps for deadlifts because you can put your feet in the exact same place, use that hinge back, and explode up, and it's training the same muscles to fire like all hell when it's time to put them here in a bar. So again, box jumps, I'd swing back here, deadlifts, I'd start here. We're just waking up the same things as we go into the warm-up. So I've posted a couple videos on my YouTube and my Instagram about how I warm up when I do like a big deadlift. This is the same for any lift. If I want to be able to lift with power and strength and explosiveness at a heavy weight, I just did 725 on a deadlift. I'm ripping 135 like I'm about to jump through the roof with it. Same through 225, 315, 405, 495. I think I did 575, 6. I might have done like 585, and then I went to 645 for my opener. But every single one has that powerful twitch, which I started just from some plyometrics, right? Now, in a training program after that, you would want your accessories or pump work to follow this, because we're still holding our high nervous system activation at this level 10, which is going to allow you to do more of your pump reps efficiently than if you skipped all of this, right? So if you just came in, let's say on the program today, you had 3 sets of 6 on an incline bench press, which is what I would do after a log. I'm going to be in a stronger, more explosive state because I stacked all of these things one after the other. Okay. Now, to follow that up, I put in posture, but we're thinking about like what accessories are really completing the puzzle of being a like functional, strong human being. So, as we're talking about the log, right? This is so much pressing here. You would want some sort of row to keep your shoulders packed back, right? Because if all you're doing is press, 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 what that does is tightens your chest. And this is exaggerated, but brings you into this sort of posture. So we would need some sort of row to put us back into position. And then also for me, I need a lot of external rotation through the shoulders so my arms don't get stuck in this forward position, right? We've probably all been there. I know a lot of us deal with like these tension headaches, and a lot of that is from this sort of thing where your traps are elevated, chest is tight, lats are tight, everything's caved in. So when I say posture to finish this out, this is really just like the accessories to keep you in alignment, okay? Now, with other workouts, like let's say you were doing this after a squat day or a heavy deadlift day or a heavy events day, you can do things like a farmer's walk or a farmer's carry at the end of your training, and that's going to knock out, your posture demands, right? Just something that's going to keep you tall and upright after you had a lot of weight crushing your back. Just something that reinforces your ability to stand up straight because that expedites recovery, keeps your mood better, keeps your digestion better. It's just one thing that kind of keeps you healthy and recovering and getting stronger over the long term, right? All right, now, a lot going on here, but I hope you're following me on this. What we want to do is make sure we're balancing over, not just the week, but the block and the whole year. So I think, right, you should be taking a long-term approach because we can slowly raise up all of these things all the time and pretty much never quit. But we do have the ability to do short, hard bursts when needed. And this is what's interesting about Strongman is, you could have a comp coming up where it's 5 presses or it's 5 types of deadlifts or it's all very complementary things where it may not make sense for you to do any more like handstand stuff or, sprinting, right? Like sometimes if you have an all static event, then it doesn't really matter if it's not going to help you to do any sprints going in. You want to allocate some of that energy into the static strength that you're going to need for comps. But then you can do things more like plyometric explosive work in place, like throws, like push-ups, like jumps in place of the sprints. So just kind of consider that. If you are somebody who's building out your own program, like I really get a big benefit out of doing all sorts of handstand work, but that doesn't carry over to a really maximally heavy log press, which every comp at the level I'm at now, it's all stupidly heavy. So I need to be much more specific about what I'm doing. So the last 6 weeks, we don't really do any of that going in, but we do it almost year round because that is continuing to long-term improve my mobility and proprioception, okay? Now, like I was saying, some of these things can be combined all together because like the handstands or, like sandbag throws, like they just work together once you're at a high enough skill. So you can save time. It seems like I'm talking about a lot, but it really doesn't take that much time. If I were to go through this and give you a time frame, right? If I was really about my business, 5 minutes, I would take a full 10 minutes here. So we're at 15. I would take only about 10 minutes here. So now we're at 25. I would take this about 25 minutes. So now we're at 50. And then I would knock off my back offs and my core stuff and probably about another 20. And that's being conservative. So this is about like a 70-minute routine here. But what I want you to consider, I'm going to be skipping ahead here, is how can you work some of this stuff in through your daily life, right? Like we talked about posture and mobilization. If you are somebody that can get up first thing in the morning and go for a walk, or you stretch and mobilize before bed, you're taking out a big need to do this in your workout day. You can definitely find 5 minutes here or there to stretch if you need to, and then you can just have this element of constantly improving your mobility and proprioception without having to throw it into your workout, right? Again, I'm trying to sort of like give you this idea and blatantly brainwash you into thinking about what are the little things that I can do where I'm just taking one step forward all the time instead of having to like maximize this in an 8-week prep. I think that's a big downfall for a lot of people. Now, when we're actually finding this balance, things and techniques we can do are using a 2-to-1 or 1.5-to-1 back to front ratio. And the reason for this is your posterior chain is the support for all lifts, right? So when I say 2-to-1 or 1.5-to-1 back to front, I mean you should be having 2 back accessories or 2 back movements for every 1 front movement. Now, one thing that I learned from Josh Bryant, which is really cool, is he puts in some sort of back work every single day for his athletes. That's a atypical approach for powerlifting. And coincidentally, once I started getting further into strongman, when you work full body splits, right, instead of just training like a squat day, a bench day, deadlift day, a lot of strongman automatically has all of this backside posterior chain day. So if I were to have 2 press days, we're always going to have a back accessory on that to reinforce positions, to complement the upper back, because that's our launch pad for the log. But then we'll have deadlifts or some sort of carry or some sort of load that are worked in after the squat day too. So we're always getting some sort of back to front work. But I just wanted to include this because even if you're doing a bench press or a log day, you need to have some sort of complementary back exercise in this, like a row, chin up, pull down, anything good there, right? So Strongman seals this, takes care of that easily. When you're building out your program, you also want to have a rest day after your biggest efforts, okay? Rest is key and critical. Recovery really is where all the gains are made. You could have the most perfect program in the entire world, but if you go home and drink a sixer and get no sleep, then it's not going to do any good for you, right? Just plain and simple. So think about when you're structuring your week out, like what is the time when you're going to be able to give yourself the most amount of rest? I think that's how you should structure and position out your heaviest work demand day, right? So I typically have, for me personally, I do a Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday split. Wednesdays and Saturdays are my biggest, most demanding days usually. That's a heavy deadlift day normally with events, and then a Saturday squat day with events normally. But then I have Thursday and Sunday entirely off to help me recover and get back in. What that also allows me is 72 hours or more. It gives me actually, 96 hours between my 2 pressing days. So I am pressing twice a week, and a lot of times, if you've been watching the video I made on the Hepburn method, or you've done one of the Strongman Club programs, we do a lot of very similar movements on the 2 press days. But when they are broken apart together, minimum 72 or 96 hours apart, 3 or 4 days apart, you have recovered enough to get right back in and increase your load and carry on with your program. So that's how you really need to focus on when you're building these out. Big sessions, 72 hours apart minimum, and or complementary sessions, 72 hours apart. So if you did like a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, that approach would work. If you did a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where you have like a squat, a press, and a deadlift day, that would work very well as well. That's following that rule. This is where we need to talk about like these 5-day splits and routines. You just would want to bring down the neural demand. So you would want, if you're doing a 5-day split, you would want maybe only like 2 or 3 of those days at most to be very, very, very heavy, or you would want them to be very low volume. Okay, but this is not really about that. Just touching on it real quick. Right? As I said earlier, can you do things like your mobility or your cardio separately? then you can take out time away from your workouts. You know, some people, like, it just takes a little bit of conscious effort to get more steps in and have more movement throughout your day. So if you're somebody that's really good about getting up and going for walks, right, then you can kind of eliminate a lot of your need for some of this cardio that you might have to do after the gym normally, right? Same if you just decide to start stretching 10 minutes every night. Daily activity is huge. So I'm going to pull this board out and we're going to go to the other side. And we're going to keep going on some fun topics here. I got tight quarters here, but stick with me as I flip over. I want to talk about just kind of some examples of, you know, then how would we actually build out routines, right? So let's start with the 3 days a week routines, okay? So if you're doing threes, kind of one easy way to do it first is a good old bro split style where you have legs, upper, and say lower two, but like deadlifts, right? Easy. Another good way, I think, for strongman and strength, the best way to do this is to do full body workouts broken up in a push-pull method. So over 2 weeks, you would be cycling, right, with like an alternating approach. So you would have week one would be a push, pull, push, and then a pull, push, pull. So it still is a push, pull workout, but we're just lengthening out the recovery periods. And this is really an awesome method. I think that a lot of people don't have the, I really just think it's discipline to only go to the gym 3 times a week. Like, we all love training and lifting, but like this is a method that will like really allow you to like kill yourself and go pretty hard, and then have like all this time in the world to recover. So I just like want you to think about, you know, right, what this might look like in strongman. You know, push, this would be like heavy front squats and heavy log presses or whatever press you're working on that day. And then you could also do like sleds or something like a sandbag carry, which is anteriorly loaded, right, out in front. So you could do sandbag squats, I should say squats, log presses, sandbags. Then you could do like deadlifts, farmers, yoke carries. And then you could do, you know, even if you were varying it up, you could do an axle circus dumbbell, leg press, sled push, right? I mean, there's so many options to this, all right? But just giving you ideas, because this, again, the idea of this video is to like help you if you want to create your own program. The dark side of the board. This is actually the light side of the board because I never write on it actually. But what would a 4 times workout look like? I mean, really, you probably guessed it by now, but my favorite is thinking of it as full body, but it would more so look like this. So we have push, pull, push, pull. This would be a log day, deadlift plus events day, log day 2, and then squats are technically classified as a push, but we're going to include it. So I'm just going to reword that. If you're doing a 4-day, this is really my favorite way to do this. I think it's the easiest way to cover all the bases. Push, pull, push, and then lower plus events. So that would be like a log, deadlift plus events, log 2, squats, and events. I do have another video from my live a couple weeks ago talking about the best training splits for strongman, where I talked a little bit more about what a 5-day and a 6-day routine would look like. But I really think ultimately that your best bet is doing a 3-day or a 4-day routine. I was actually doing a 3-day routine just like this going into America's Strongest Man to help me recover. So my routine actually would be, if I had 2 weeks, it would be well, I'm going to say press because I was doing a press medley, which was awful to set up, honestly. Having to set up 3 heavy implements in the Florida heat is a disaster. Anyways. So it would cycle exactly like this, right? So I have 4 training days. But sometimes I'd have periods of like a full week where I wasn't squatting. But because everything was so heavy, like I'm not losing strength. You can actually maintain peak strength for 30 days if you don't train. That's just how your muscles and your nervous system connect. So, um, yeah, guys, I mean, there's really a lot of ways to skin the cat, but I think for strength, your best bets are to have, for strength training days, 3 to 4 days, but that ultimately depends on your individual recovery. So that's kind of what we got going over here. I'm going to leave it open to some questions for a minute here. But while we do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the experimental program that me and my coach are on, which is, well, why don't we take a step back? I've been working with my coach for almost 2 years, and one of the biggest benefits to hiring a coach is having them take care of the long-term decision making for you, right? It may only seem like, hey, they're just giving me 8 weeks at a time, but no, the good ones are actually thinking about like, okay, well, what does this mean for this person over 12 months? I hired my guy when I told him, Max, I said, hey man, like I'm looking at this over like 2 to 3 years. I think that I can make the finals at Worlds in 3 years' time. And because I handed over the reins and because I let him plot out 18 months for me, I made World Finals in 18 months, which was literally half the time I thought it was going to take me. So now we're doing an overload system, which our intention is actually looking this over 2 years. So we're on a 2-year program right now, but here's the thing. It's going to pay off. I just have to be patient and trust the process. And it's kind of one of these interesting things where when you detach from the time and the destination of having to need things now, you actually tend to end up getting them a little quicker. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I just invite you to start thinking about this long-term perspective. I want you to think about like, okay, well, if I was going to just improve 1% every day, forget thinking about like, all right, I'm going to get my deadlift up 10% in 3 months, right? Like if you were to do the compounding interest rule of I'm building up all of these little attributes 1% at a time, you're not just compounding interest with one specific like measurable road, but all these other things that complement that. And then before you know it, you're going to turn back around and say, holy crap, I got so much more muscular, more conditioned, more mobile, I compete better, and it just adds and stacks all along itself. So you have to be in this mindset long term of, what's the like little investments that I can do all the time in order to add up. That's why when we went back over this, kind of phase, it was, warm up, mobilize, prime, power, pump, and posture. Like if we can really work on every little element all the time, you are just going to get so fucking good at this thing, it will astound you, So with that, I would also just like to give you a general reminder to not put pressure on yourself to be perfect, okay? When we have this mindset of slow, steady, gradual improvement, we absorb and absorb is not the right word. We take off a lot of pressure of ourselves to have to do these by a specific time or date. We instead just get into a mode of I'm going to improve no matter what. That's what's cool about this experimental program that I'm on is there's going to be times when I need to set some sort of personal best, but all I have to do is add literally 1/4 of a pound to a lift and then it'll be done. So I'm alluding to this, but it's a lot of like isometric holds and positional work and like really short range of motion work. So the pressure is not on to make these big gigantic gains. The focus is just like, I'm going to find a way to get just a little bit better this time. So that's what I'm trying to tell you is really the secret and one of the mindsets to getting successful. I was just talking to a former client tonight, man. He's been beating himself up over, he just gained a lot of weight recently. And he's like, man, every time I set these like really crazy ambitious goals and I get going and then I just totally derail myself. Well, it's like, well, it's because you're just obsessing over the end point, That's it. It's just that simple. You're obsessing over the destination and not the journey itself. So I'm not trying to preach at you like I have this all figured out, because like I certainly go through the struggle of this all the time. I hate the process sometimes. I had a little bit of that during my America's Strongest Man prep. I got it together near the end, thank God. But that's how it goes sometimes. So whatever you got to do to give yourself those reminders, that's where things like gratitude practice and mindfulness comes in, and de-stressing, managing your stress, all that stuff helps you. But long-term focus and dedication and discipline is the answer. So I'm going to end it there. I think that's a pretty good place. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. If anybody has a question, I am happy to field. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off. Maybe I'll do some laundry. But that's going to be a night for me. Yeah, man. How about one more concept? In my opinion, too, you only should be peaked for a very short amount of time. When you're going into a competition, you only have like a finite limit of energy stores, right? Like, we have this training effect to where we build up a whole lot of fatigue, and we then relax and recover and then build up through super compensation where our abilities are greater than ever. But what happens when our abilities are greater than ever is it allows us to push heavier and push harder, which actually allows us to fatigue our bodies more than ever, because we're just able to get into a higher throttle than we ever could before. So, we don't want to be so like freaky strong and like pushing to those max abilities all the time, because recovery is like the most important thing. So we always have to hold back a little bit, and really you need to have the patience to only do your like maxes or like absolute crushing balls to the walls days, like very little in your training, right? There are times and places where you can do that. Maybe like one day you get to test out your sandbags or something, but that's different from going for like a 1 rep max on your deadlift every 3 weeks. You know what I mean? So that's just another thing. Kind of wrap this up. Last point, and then I'm out of here. You only should be peaked for a very short amount of time. My peak for America's Strongest Man probably lasted. I was probably in that peak state for about 4 days. Maybe even less. Maybe like 2 or 3 days. But I don't need to be there any longer than that. It's just like preparing for war, and then you recharge, reset, and then come back stronger the next time. It's so funny when I started shitting on these people who call themselves Vikings and making fun of people who go to war, that I actually do see it a little bit more like that now. So, but it's all in good fun, right? All right, here's a question from top fan John Chappell, my man. How do you navigate trusting the process and enjoying it, but also knowing you're much better when working towards a goal? Basically not worrying about that goal, but it also drives you. Yeah, great question. Okay, so I didn't understand this for a long time too. This is what people in the like manifestation, spirituality world say. I used to like fucking bang my head into the wall because I desire this thing so fucking bad. And it really just like stressed me out more than anything. I was like, why am I not doing it? Why? Why is it not coming? Why am I not manifesting? Blah, 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 blah. What we have to do is get really good at tapping into the emotional state of the destination. We don't want to obsess about it, but like, what is it that we actually want, from that goal? It's important to really dig into that question very, very seriously. This whole talk tonight started with goals. What is your goal? But the most important thing is getting into that reason why. So like, to give you part of my motivation, one of the reasons I want to be so good as a strongman is because, I was a fat, bullied kid when I was young. And one, I want to push myself to see how far I can take it. I want to, be a shining light for others that like, hey, I've overcome this. You can do it too. And like, just be the example that, dude, you can achieve anything you want. So I do try very hard to vision myself as a leader. I mean, this is why I try to do a lot of these talks and these YouTubes and all of this different stuff is because like most people have absolutely no fucking idea what they're capable of. And it's downright depressing because there's all sorts of reasons that are holding us down and holding us back collectively. And people are just literally blinded to it. But I have been fortunate enough through my experience, my mentors, and the people that have helped me, dude, I've achieved things far greater than I ever could have imagined. But I know that most people don't have that goal. So I think about what it would be like for me to get to a place to where not only am I proud of all the hard work I have done and I feel like a winner, but I also can be an example for other people that like, hey, you can do this too, man. Like to be able to ignite and inspire people like that. Like I haven't done a whole lot of it yet in my mind, but the prospect of it excites me so much and I feel that emotion. And that's what gets me excited to show up for all the little things that I don't want to do, man. Like training is hard sometimes. Like I do enjoy it ultimately, but sometimes it's a chore. It's a chore to cook and eat all your meals the way you're supposed to. It's a chore to walk 10,000 steps every day. It's a chore to drink all your water every day. It's a chore to go to sleep on time, get up when you're supposed to. But when you have that reason like really deep in your soul and you spend time daily to connect to how you're going to feel when you achieve that, you just start having more of this inspired action inside of you to feel good about the process. So I hope that answers that. It was a little more of an answer than you probably expected, but man, Jablo, just tell you, look up some Neville Goddard. That guy's pretty good. He's all about feeling is the secret. You got to feel it with like your emotion and everything. It's not just visualization. There needs to be a bigger word for that, but you visualize it with all your other senses too. You connect to it and you remember that every single day. So that's that. Gang. I'm out of here, guys. Have a good Tuesday night. Stay strong.